Hello, this is Darren DePaul, the voice of Emperor Valkorion, and you're watching another video by Vulkk.
Greetings everyone, this is the video guide for Jedi Sentinel WATCHMAN Discipline in SWTOR Patch 5.0. I have a very extensive written guide, so in this video version of the guide, I'm actually going to restrain or limit myself to only the most important things because I don't want to spend 40 minutes on a video that actually has been better explained in a written form. I don't know about all of you, but I personally prefer things written ahead of me, in front of me, instead of having to watch a video, then pause every few seconds to read a description or switch between windows to check that or test that by myself on my own character in game. So let me very quickly introduce the structure of the guide for Watchman. It is exactly the same structure for my other 3 guides available at the moment. There might be a couple more for other classes as well in the very near future, and I hope to be able to do that for you. First, we've got, introduction. Then we've got stats and gearing, followed by ability priorities and utility builds. Utility builds is exactly what the bigger portion of this video you're watching right now is going to be about, because I've only showed a few, 3 actually, standard builds for utilities that can be considered general purpose use. I'm going to explain to you all of the utilities for the Sentinel right now, right here. And I'm going to tell you which one I consider good for what kind of gameplay environment and what purposes do they serve. Down below, we've got the priority list for Watchman, and below it, we actually have a template for an opener. Let me jump in game and quickly tell you that you should not pay attention to Vulkk's stats or the damage you see when I test things on the dummy, because the gear is on another character at the moment. That's not really important. In the written form of the guide, when you scroll up and you go to stats and gearing, this is where you'll find all of my suggestions, all of my advices of how to gear up your characters for general purposes, for PvE, that is actually, because for PvP you don't really need 110 accuracy. But yep, that's the base. You need 110 accuracy, then you need 40+% crit chance, and because crit and surge are the same, you can't really have a different percentage for surge. You want at least, as it is mentioned here somewhere, you want at least 1500 alacrity. That is for the optimal stats. If you don't have access to the highest tier of gear, you will have lower stats in alacrity, crit, and everything else. It's very important to start with accuracy first. All of this is explained here in the written form, so I don't think I want to spend too much time. Let's focus on the more interesting part here in game and talk about ability priorities. For the Watchman, it is most important to have all of your dots running all of the time. So the priority goes as follows: Force Melt, Cauterize, Overload Saber, Merciless Slash, and Blade Barrage. Now, Blade Barrage has been redesigned, but you should not accept this as a nerf, since it only takes 1 global cooldown, it's still free, doesn't take any resources, and it has well, by default it should have 18 seconds cooldown, but apparently Vulkk has some alacrity on himself at the moment. And with that said, let's go into AoE environment because of Burning Sweep, which deals with it applies specific buffs to Force Sweep. This is the dot spreading ability for Watchman. For AoE environments, you want to apply both of your dots on the dummy first. Let me build some resources, some focus. You apply the Force Melt, you apply the Cauterize, and then you quickly use a Force Sweep. Force Sweep affects up to 8 targets in an AoE, full AoE environment around you in the distance of up to 5 meters. So you burn 1 target, and then you Force Sweep the burns to all of the other targets in the range. Now be careful, because Force Sweep only has 5-meter range, and you have to learn to visually measure the distance between you and the opponents. You can actually usually practice this with different kinds of size targets when you play solo game or while you're leveling. For example, if this was to be, let's say, a Rancor, I may stay that far away, and because the Rancor is actually much bigger, the distance is still going to fall within the melee range, even though the dummy training is 10 meters away. Rancor is much bigger, and the distance is still going to be within the 4 or 5 meters range. In terms of opener, we will follow the exact same priority as we did in 4.0. First and foremost, of course, you will try to force sleep if the game situation allows you. After force sweep, you would have to build up some resources with Zilla strikes. Then, my personal recommendation is to use Merciless Slash, because you want to start building up the Merciless Slash proc and the Merciless Slash stacks as soon as possible. You need to keep those stacks, so try to use Merciless Slash on cooldown. After the dots, it's the next biggest ability, and it is the biggest hitting, the hardest hitting ability. So even though this spec Watchman completely lacks any kind of burst, if you want to deal big damage instantly, Merciless Slash is your best friend. Obviously, this patch as well, but if you want to use this patch on a target above 30% HP, you will need to combine it with a couple of utilities that will be explained later in the video. So, if you want, you can pre-build Valorous Call, or if you want, you can just sit down and introspect or meditate and build up the 30 stacks of centering using Inspired, where the hell is it? Using Contemplation. I personally don't recommend it unless you're in a very specific boss encounter, or for PvP maybe. So, showing it kind of slowly, we begin with the jump, and then we quickly apply Overload Saber. We go with the Zilla Strike, building up some resources, then Force Melt, which actually as well builds resources now, very useful. And then we go Cauterize. And because I told you that you should use Merciless Slash quickly and early in the rotation in the opener, let's start again. We go with a Force Sleep. We activate Overload Saber, we build up with Zilla Strike, then we immediately go to Merciless Slash to start building up those Merciless stacks, and then you apply the Force Melt and the Cauterize. After that, you should use Blade Barrage, and then comes Twin Saber Throw, and you start with the fillers, and whatever comes next. There is a slight amount, very small amount of RNG involved in the spec, because your burns can actually build up your focus. If you do that quick enough, of course, things won't come off cooldown. So yeah, that's kind of important. This is a basic opener. For more detailed explanation, please visit back the written version of the guide, because I have explained it in a lot more details, which abilities come after which, why the priority system is as it is, why it's not the other way around, what other things you can stack here and there, why Zen is useful, when Zen is useful, how and why you should combine it with Valorous Call, and other things like that. Coming back into the game, and I would like to talk about now the utilities. We've got 4 tiers of utilities now: Skillful, Masterful, Heroic, and Legendary. Skillful is free for everybody since level... I forgot what level was that, never mind. Masterful requires you to have... Let me reset that, because the utilities you see here are just experimental. Masterful requires you to have at least 2 points spent, which is spend 2 points to unlock Masterful. Then you need to spend 4 points in total, not 2 plus 2, but 4 in total to unlock Heroic. And you need to spend 6 points in total to unlock Legendary. Let's talk about the utilities themselves. As I've told you, I believe, earlier in the video, maybe if I haven't, I'll tell you now, the utilities and the combination of utilities don't heavily depend on whether you're playing Watchman or Combat or even Concentration. I don't have a guide for Concentration because I play it very rarely, and I don't dare say that I'm proficient enough and familiar enough with that spec to be able to advise you on how to build and play it. So, the combination of utilities depend on what encounter you're facing, whether it's PvP or PvE, boss, solo, or something else. That's how you should structure and build your utilities. They shouldn't be dependent on what spec you're choosing. Jedi Enforcer increases the damage dealt by Rebuke by 15% and increases its duration by 4%. One of the must-have utilities, very nice in combination with Jedi Crusader. Adamant, you generate 4 focus when stunned, immobilized, put to sleep, or knocked around. Additionally, the cooldown of Resolute is reduced by 30 seconds. Extremely useful for PvP environments because you want to build free focus, and Resolute is a must-have on a short cooldown, as short as possible for PvP. Since you are a melee DPS character, you spend about 90% of your time being stunned, slowed, rooted, or any kind of CC'd. Trailblazer, extremely useful and the best utility for AoE purposes. Cyclone Slash deals 25% more damage. Now, Watchman doesn't exactly primarily benefit from Cyclone Slash because to spread your dots, thanks to the Burning Sweep passive buff, you need to use Force Sweep. But you can't really use Force Sweep all the time since it does have a default cooldown of 6 seconds. And this means that you're free to use Cyclone Slash while your targets are burning around you. So it's still good to have in PvE, in PvP and PvE AoE environments. Jedi Crusader, while Rebuke is active, it generates 1 focus whenever you are attacked. This effect can happen only once every 2 seconds. One more time, Rebuke has a very short cooldown of 1 minute, and you can actually lower it by another utility later on that I will tell you in a moment. So I usually tend to have Jedi Enforcer and Jedi Crusader in pretty much all of my builds. The next one is Stoic. Increases your damage reduction by 2% and you build 2 centering from attacks coming to you. This centering building effect can happen only once every global cooldown, which is 1.5 seconds. Very useful utility, but for that to be useful, you actually need to be taking damage. So it's good for PvP, but it's only situational for PvE. If you stand behind the target in a boss fight, or if you're clever enough not to take any damage, Stoic may actually prove to be useless to you. Debilitation. Blade Barrage immobilize the target for 3 seconds. Kind of useful in PvP, completely useless in PvE. Jumping down to the Masterful tier, we start with Incisor, Force Leap, Force Melt, Clashing Blast, and Zealous Leap. Snare the target, reducing its movement speed by 50% for 6 seconds. That's incredibly useful for PvP because the more of your abilities apply a slow snare or any kind of CC, the better. Watchguard reduces the cooldown of Pacify by 15 seconds and increases its range by 6 meters. In addition, the cooldown of Force Kick is reduced by 2 seconds and Rebuke can be used while stunned. Very useful utility for PvP only. I personally don't see much of a use for that in PvE, except for when maybe bashing the dummy and you combine it with Zealous Judgment. I'll talk about it later on. Moving on to Force Fade, increases your movement speed by 15% and the movement speed bonus of Force Camouflage by 20%. Additionally, it increases the duration of Force Camouflage by 2 seconds. Really useful for many PvP and PvE environments. It's important utility to have in most of your builds. Defensive Row reduces damage taken from area effect by 30% and increasing tournament elemental damage reduction by 3%. If you plan to take damage, this is a must-have utility. It's present in most of my builds since no matter how good player you or I believe we are, we do take damage, and in PvP it's pretty much the most important utility to start with. There are other places to spend your points, by the way, if you want to increase DPS. So you can sacrifice that 1 point in Defensive Row and put it someplace else. Pulse reduces the cooldown of Force Stasis by 15 seconds. Not among my favorite utilities. Ardor. Transcendence no longer requires or consumes centering, but it will go on cooldown for half a minute when activated. Since for the Jedi Sentinel, both Watchman and Combat, it's mostly important to use Zen. Having the 30 stacks of centering available for Transcendence is almost never a good idea. So having Ardor in any kind of environment, single player, PvE or PvP, it's always good to have Transcendence for that extra speed buff. It's actually very, very important for some specific boss encounters. Jumping down to the heroic section. Fleet-footed. When Transcendence is applied or refreshed, it purges movement impairing effects. Additionally, the movement speed bonus of Transcendence is increased by 30%. Well, it can go in a very nice combination with Ardor, since if you plan to use Transcendence on a specific timer or on cooldown, depending on what you might be doing, it's good to combine it with another utility that further boosts Transcendence. Still, it's considered to be situational. Raining Reach increases the range of Leg Slash to 10 meters, and additionally Leg Slash now consumes 2 less focus, which actually makes it extremely useful and nearly free to use. And immobilizes the target for 3 seconds. This immobilizing effect cannot be applied to the same target more than once every 10 seconds. Only useful for PvP, but very good there. And I've already touched a little bit the idea behind Contemplation. Reduce the cooldown of all by 15 seconds. It's an AoE stun, only useful in PvP. The second part is interesting though. In addition, you build up to 30 centering over the course of using Introspection. The effect can happen only once every 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds you meditate down and you can build up your 30 stacks of centering for free. This is good if you know what comes ahead and if you want to be prepared. It's a very, very situational utility for PvE. And rather interesting and useful for some cases in PvP, depending on what you're doing, whether you're solo queuing for war zones. If you are roaming the open world, it's probably one of the best utility points to spend. Excuse me. Continuing down the line with Jedi Promulgator, one of my most favorite words to pronounce because I'm certain to fail every time. Each use of Strike, Zealous Strike, and Leg Slash reduces your active cooldown of Rebuke. Well, it actually goes in a good combination with the Jedi Crusader and Jedi Enforcer because all of these 3 utilities benefit the same one, Rebuke. I think I've mentioned earlier, maybe I haven't, Rebuke is considered both defensive and offensive boost, but it's situational in offensive boost terms. It's primarily supposed to be used as defensive ability. Enduring increases the duration of Guarded by the Force by 2 seconds and reduces its cooldown by 30 seconds. Guarded by the Force is incredibly good, but you have to be extremely careful when and how you use it. It's not very useful in PvP because of its long cooldown, unless it's a 1v1 match. But for some boss encounters, such as the 4th boss, Master and Blaster in the Ravagers operation, it's really good to have Enduring. And it's good to combine it with Expunging Camouflage. Force Camouflage removes all cleansable effects when activated. Thank you very much. Moving down to the legendary tier. Cut Loose. Blade Blitz can be used while immobilized, purges movement impairing effects when activated, and deals 50% more damage. Additionally, the cooldown of Blade Blitz is reduced by 10 seconds. Blade Blitz is extremely situational ability in PvE and kind of fun and good in many cases to use in PvP. I can't really wrap up my mind on Cut Loose whether it's a must-have in PvP, but it certainly is a waste of time or a waste of utility point for PvE. Zealous Ward. Activating Saber Ward grants immunity to stun, sleep, lift, and incapacitating effects for 6 seconds. And getting attacked while Saber Ward is active heals you for 3% of your maximum health. This healing effect can only occur once every second. This is extremely situational, probably ever good for, let's say, 1v1 PvP matches where you are actually allowed to have it. Saber Ward is on an extremely long cooldown of 3 minutes, and since most of the fights in this game end up in 5 to 6 minutes, very few of them are longer than this duration. I'm speaking of PvE boss encounters. Zealous Ward is very, very situational, and I personally very rarely pick it up. The next one is Inspired Focus. Inspiration generates 12 focus when activated, and you heal yourself for 1% of the maximum health whenever you activate an ability that consumes focus. Super situational. I don't really remember ever using Inspired Focus in any kind of game activity since this utility was introduced, I believe, with 4.0. And yes, it generates the full amount of 12 focus because that's the maximum focus points or resource points you're allowed to have on your Jedi Sentinel. Intercessor. Force Sleep grants Intercessor. It's one of the new utilities, extremely good and fun to play with. Force Sleep grants Intercessor, allowing you to activate Force Sleep a second time. Intercessor lasts up to 7.5 seconds and it is removed if Force Sleep is reused. If Intercessor is not utilized by the end of its duration, Force Sleep is placed on a 7.5 second cooldown. Additionally, Force Sleep now builds to Centering. Well, Force Sleep is usually your first ability in any kind of an opener. Of course, if you are allowed to open and begin the fight from at least 10 meters range. And it's really, really good to have Force Sleep for being able to jump around different kinds of targets. It's useful for both PvP and PvE, and I strongly recommend you to try and have it in pretty much all of your builds. The next one is called Hidden Advanced. While Force Camouflage is active, you gain a charge of Hidden Advanced every half second. Each charge of Hidden Advance increases the damage dealt by your next melee attack by 4%. It stacks up to 12 charges and lasts up to 6 seconds after exiting Force Camouflage. The most situational utility ever. I personally don't see any use for that unless you want to surprise your target in an open world PvP environment and you see someone before they see you, which actually happens very rarely. I don't really find any good use of Hidden Advance. It has a huge DPS boost potential. Maybe you can use it if you want to increase your dummy bashing experience, but in real gameplay environment, not really. And here is another one of the new utilities and among my favorite as well. Zealous Judgment. This patch refunds 2 focus when used on a target affected by your Pacify. And remember, Pacify was boosted here with WatchGuard in the Masterful section. So if you have WatchGuard, you might want to have Zealous Judgment. This patch refunds 2 focus when used on a target affected by your Pacify, and it can be used on any target affected by your Pacify, regardless of the remaining health, because you know by default, this patch is supposed to be used only on targets that are below 30% of their HP. Additionally, activating Pacify grants Zealous Judgment, increasing your force and tech resistance by 75% for 6 seconds. Really cool buff. Unfortunately, a little bit too situational for me to be able to include it in all of my builds. And the fact that we've got 4 tiers with 6 utilities, 24 in total, and only 8 utility points to spend means that Zealous Judgment in my personal priority list goes a little bit somewhere into the middle. That was it. I hope you found this video guide useful. If you have any more questions, I would like to refer you, of course, back again into the written forum of the guide, because this is where I've spent most of my time in the last couple of weeks and actually throughout all of my gameplay since 5.0 has been released. And I really tried to include absolutely everything I can think of. If you think I've missed something, add it down in the comments below. If you have any more further questions, I'm always glad to be able to help if I can. Thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed the video. Click the like button and help me out. Visit my website vulkk.com for daily videos and news. To help me improve and expand, consider becoming my patron with a small monthly pledge. And stay in touch by following me on Facebook and Twitter.